The National Union of Metal Workers, NUMSA, is a union that was started in the 22nd of May, 1987. Compared to the unions here, it's a baby union. But, as I said, its history goes back to 1973. Unions in South Africa go back to the 19th century. But black African workers were not allowed to become members of unions. And this exclusion of becoming members of black unions went right up to 1981. You couldn't be, there were members, but you couldn't be a member of a union because the law under apartheid didn't recognize you as an employee. So all the history of organizing from the turn of the century was all self-initiative and outside of the law. And that gave black workers a certain temperament of organizing outside of the system and against the system, because the system did not recognize them. I'll cut the long history. We had unions, black unions, right up to, let's say, 1960. As you all know that in 1960, there was the banning of the ANC and other political parties. And the union that was aligned to the ANC and the Communist Party was called the South African Congress of Trade Unions, SACTU. And SACTU continued for a couple of years into about 63. But by 63, SACTU was defunct.
63.
About 63. So for about 10 years, there were no black trade unions of any significance in South Africa. And in 1973, in a big debate amongst academics, spontaneous struggle in the port of Durban, workers came out and said that we don't have money. And they demanded wage increase. And there was a wave of strikes. And this gave rise to the birth of unions like the Metal and Allied Workers Union. So the unions that became COSATU in 85 all came from the 1973 Durban strikes. So it's a new movement. It has a history, but it's a history that's truncated. It gets broken. It's outside of the system and all of that. And in 1979, because these unions were growing, the South African government appointed a commission to talk about their recognition. And in 1981, for the first time, black African workers were allowed to become members of unions. So if you look at it, some of the incorporation of the union into the industrial relations system began that time. So L, to come straight to your question about NUMSA, NUMSA was formed in 1987, and it was a merger of mainly 5 unions. The Metal and Allied Workers Union, a union that had organized in the automobile workers sector, and I'll talk about that. We have 7 auto assembly plants in South Africa, all foreign owned. There isn't a South African auto assembler. They're all foreign owned.
European or U.S.?
Oh, General Motors, Ford, Nissan, Toyota, Daimler Chrysler. It's called Daimler Chrysler now. Okay, so all these 7 plants, we are 85% organized in them. Okay, so we are these unions, 5 unions came together. They formed NUMSA. And the thing about NUMSA, let me just say a little bit, and I'll come to the present, is that NUMSA was a mix of tendencies. The people in MAU, which is the Metal and Allied Workers Union, were the 1968 generation, neo-Marxists, and predominantly white. These were white intellectuals who had gone to study in France, at Sussex, and all, who came back, and because of black consciousness said, look, you know, you don't have a role, or your role must be subordinate. They began to see workers. So a lot of people who were in Mau were the sort of neo-Marxist and anti-communist party, very critical of the ANC. So there is a long tradition in NUMSA of what you can call an anti-ANC, anti-SACP tradition. And some of the traditions about grassroots, shop steward council, I mean, I don't have to talk, the people in this room, this is the 68 generation. Renault in France and all of that and all over the world. So they brought this into this union and they built this union in this manner. There were also other traditions in NUMSA which were linked to the Communist Party. Because what had happened is that many of the people in the Communist Party who were involved in the unions that are called the South African Congress of Trade Unions had been jailed at Robben Island and had served their first 10-year prison sentences. And they were all coming out of prison in 73. And they were beginning to link with these movements. But I can say that the majority and the dominant tendency by 1987 in NUMSA was the 1968 generation. This is a union critical of the ANC, critical of the Communist Party, not a couple of Trotskyist groupings, but not dominant in the union. Now, to quickly fast forward onto that tradition of whether you call neo-Marxist, syndicalist, whatever you want to call it, which is critical of the ANC. As I said, were mainly white. And black matters in South Africa. The race question is an important one. And what had happened is that many of these intellectuals, although playing an important role in organizing these workers, and I must say these were academics. In my union, when I came into the union, we had two PhDs of astronomy. The head of collective bargaining had a PhD in astronomy. That's why we have a complicated bargaining strategy, because he looked at the stars and decided this is what was the bargaining strategy. And these were lawyers, economic professors who dedicated their life to organizing black African workers. By the time we get to the 90s, they were drifting rightwards. And because of no social roots, they were in the union, but they had not really linked up with the sort of black African working class. And the second reason is that don't believe what you hear about the peaceful transition in South Africa. There was no peaceful transition in South Africa. There wasn't a seizure of power, but by 1990, when the ANC was unbanned, the apartheid government unleashed a war in South Africa. And close to about 100,000 people were killed between 1990 and 1993 in what became called black-on-black violence. So anyone who talks about a peaceful transition in South Africa didn't live in South Africa. And this impacted on the working class in a big way. Now, what has this got to do with NUMSA? The white leadership, white intellectuals didn't have the answer to the violent question. Because the question of defense, the question of the unleashing of armed gangs on trains when workers were going home needed self-defense. It couldn't be solved by reading Karl Marx. It needed self-defense through arms. And the ANC stepped in, and people like Ronnie Casrills started organizing self-defense units, and in many ways won the ANC cadre that was there because they had practical solutions. They had practical solutions that other people didn't have. So gradually, let me just gradually, the union that was critical of the ANC became dominated by the Communist Party and the ANC. By the time we got onto the middle of the 90s, NUMSA was a ANC Communist Party dominated union. Sprinklings of critical people, but the hegemonic line. And what had happened to the critical people is that they moved to the right. They started with Althusser, Polansas, went into regulation school, and drifted into post-Fordism and all other funny theories. And many of them, when the Mandela government began, they took government positions. NUMSA lost 88 people who went into government. I'm talking about 1994. I'm talking about local, national, and state. Officials, elected representatives, and all of that. And the other thing I want to say is that many people say that neoliberalism in South Africa came with the ANC. Now, I dispute that. The people who brought neoliberalism were in the main this white left, which was in NUMSA, because they began to think about post-Fordism and the opportunities and training and all of that and what was possible, and as they started shifting to the right. And the ANC, I'm not excusing the ANC, didn't know much about economic policy. All these economists of NUMSA were the people who started thinking about the need to become globally competitive. If you look at NUMSA organizer in 1990, that book, Womack and Womack, The Machine That Changed the World, and the question of Toyotism, Kaizen, and all of that, this is how to make the world. This is what we were all taught. And in that way, the corrosion of the union had begun. So by the middle of the 90s, 96, the union is a communist union, dominated by the Communist Party, dominated by the ANC. But still remnants of some of the traditions. What they left are the internal democratic traditions. Steve was in South Africa. He came to speak at a shop steward council. This is shop steward in a locality. They meet once a week from different factories. No official. They run the union themselves. Factory problems. What's your problem? What's that? What's that? That's that. What's that? They discuss it. And this happens every week throughout the country. And these was sort of the 68 generation had left this tradition in the union. It still continues up to today. It continues up to today. Direct answer to you, are we having a drive into that? The union started with about less than just about 100,000 people. We're the fastest growing union in South Africa. We have about 364,000 members. We are the biggest union in COSATU, and we are the biggest union in the rest of the continent. And we continue to grow. Let me just quickly say about the issue that Howard. Mary Jane. Let me take Mary Jane. Let's talk about this one, and maybe this is sometimes not too clear. We have, as a union, many projects. But I want to talk about two political projects. Just two. And these we see as different. Sometimes these, you want to overlap them for your own liking. But keep them separate. Keep them separate. We had a special National Congress in 2013. And this special National Congress was motivated by the massacre in Marikana. Firstly, workers said, look, we can't vote for a party and a government that mows down workers. Secondly, the ANC in 2012 adopted a plan that's called the National Development Plan, the NDP, which is a 20-year plan. And that NDP is, according to us, a neoliberal plan. So we took two things. We took the NDP, got some cartoonist. They did a cartoon book, translated into 11 languages. We took the DVD, which I'm sure you have seen, on Marikana. We went on to a road show. Factory by factory, local by local. And as soon as we finish showing this to workers, the workers, they say, okay, that's good. But who are we going to vote for in May 2014? So we say, no, but we have a resolution in 2012 that we support the ANC. Said, There was no Marikana. There was no National Development Plan. who are we going to vote for? And this question of who we're going to vote for led to the convening of a special national congress. And that special national congress took decisions about these two projects. I'm not going to mention others. The first project was that we as NUMSA must lead. Am I loud enough for
Oh, you're perfect.
Perfect, okay. That we as NUMSA must lead in the establishment of what we call is a united front. And that united front is a front that brings together organized workers, both urban and rural. It brings together also the unemployed, and it builds movements who are in the reproductive sphere, or what is called social movements. Migrants, everyone who's, we don't have a vernacular name for neoliberalism. We call anyone who's affected by the shoe that's small size. That person must come into this. So that's what the United Front, and we agreed on certain principles, and the principles are principles of against inequality, a commitment to an egalitarian society, and all of that. A very minimalist program. A very minimalist program. And we then said, side by side with that, we must explore the idea of a political party, which we call a movement for socialism, because we are a socialist union. And for us, and unlike the other groups there, we are very clear that the United Front is an organ of struggle, and that membership of the United Front is not conditional on endorsement of socialism. You can be a faith-based organization fighting poverty. We think that if you are mass-based, you have a role to play in the United Front. You can be a LGBTI organization and maybe not too sure about how that links up with the idea of socialism. You have a role to play in this. Rural organizations and all of that. So we are building a coalition of organizations that will fight neoliberalism in South Africa. But as I said, side by side with that, we think that there is a need for a political instrument. And the resolution says, we don't think that the Communist Party can be won back to the path of struggle. And a new chapter has arrived, and that chapter is for exploring the establishment of a party that is committed in action and in policy to the ideas of socialism. And these are two separate initiatives, but related. Now, sometimes our far left comrades have a very instrumentalist view of both the United Front and the party, because they see the United Front as a stepping stone towards the party. And we've been under a lot of criticism from other organizations that this coiling back from making the United Front a socialist organization is a bit of a retreat. And we said, how can it be a retreat? We are a socialist union. We believe in socialism.
But you don't have to be a socialist.
But to be a member of the United Front, we as socialists, we will try and be hegemonic within the United Front. We don't have to make it a condition for membership. But as I'm talking to a lot of people here, I think that, I don't know, here in the States, our Trotskyist friends in South Africa seem to have forgotten the transitional method. I'm not talking about the transitional program of 1938, the transitional method. The transitional method is that you start at the level of consciousness of ordinary people. And as they struggle around their own conditions, they graduate from an issue about housing, about unemployment, and link that to the system of capitalism. And your task, using the transitional method, is to ensure that this graduation takes place. I think that there is a very maximalist approach where the idea of socialism gets put up front. And as I said the other day, if you do that, you will remain a sect. You will remain a small group with a newspaper, good program, nice discussion, but you can't build a movement. A movement must be built, and a movement is a prerequisite for any socialist instrument or party. And that's why these two things, for us, are separate but related. And if I was talking to somewhere and trying to sound too Marxist, I said, there is a dialectical relationship between the two, but they're not collapsible into one. Okay, so we working on these two parts. So in the union, there are two task teams. There's a task team that's working on the United Front, and the idea, we've been consulting and to bring this on the United Front and people and movements and all of that. And there is a task team which is called the Movement for Socialism task team. And this is the task team that is looking to the party question. And it's looking at program, it's looking at form and all of that. And we are discussing it in the union. And I mean, the last thing I just want to say about that, and maybe I can take some questions about that, is that we do, some of us, believe that the United Front must be a front of autonomous organization, social movements. Unions must come as autonomous, the women's group must be autonomous, the rural must be autonomous and be guided by common principles. And we've begun to develop some of those. There are 6 areas of disagreement which we want to settle. And one of those are the comrades from the far left who are nudging us to make the United Front socialist. And we as NUMSA will say, no. We are socialists, but we don't think that should be in the program. Don't make that a precondition, because you're going to exclude a lot of people if you make that as a precondition. So that's what we're discussing. And it will be settled on the 25th, 26th, 27th of June, when we have a conference to launch the United Front. But our union position is that this is an instrument of struggle, and that's what we want to forge. The movement for socialism, what we've done about that is to have large political school about what socialism is. We've gone on to 20th century experiments. We've looked at some of the errors in that. We've looked at the discussion in that. In the union, there are a mix of people. There's a strong Marxist, Leninist tradition coming from the Communist Party. There are others, some of us, who think that that Marxist-Leninist tradition has to shed some of its that. We've sent the people around the world. They've been to Brazil, Bolivia, Venezuela, workers, to study, speak to other workers about what does it mean to build socialism. And
Been to Cuba, China.
okay, Cuba, let's just say that. Cuba, we are close to the South African Communist Party, and you are splittist, so we are not welcome there. The Chinese, we are close to the Communist Party, and as I was saying to them, we spoke to the Vietnamese people, and we wanted them, and the only thing the Vietnamese Communist Party was to give us was Vietnamese coffee. So we've spoken to the other, the Syriza. There's a big, we had a big conference in August last year where we invited, in each country we'll invite a political party or political parties in the left, and we'll invite social movements and what we call critical voices. And we told them, when you arrive at the O.R. Tambo International Airport, leave your sectarianism and your differences in your country at the airport. You'll pick them up when you leave.
Right.
Because when we invited Syriza, KKE said, are you inviting Syriza? We said, yes, we are. We are inviting them. And we want to hear from both sides of the story. But they said, the KKE, we're not coming. There are many communist parties in India. They said, are you inviting so-and-so? We said, yeah, we're inviting so-and-so. Because we want to hear all the traditions of the left in India. So we have invited, but we were, Mary Jane, the existing socialists. North Koreans, we didn't bother. Okay. But Cuba, we wrote to them, we phoned, we harassed, we spoke to the embassy, we tried, but their links to the ANC just meant that they wouldn't come. So we are exploring this idea of a party and an instrument and all of that, and we're hoping to come to some conclusion. And again, let me make it a point. The big debate that the United Front, is it a stepping stone towards a party? We say that the two maybe will merge, meaning that the process is that, but we're not starting on the basis that the other one is just a show to get somewhere. They're separate, they have their own autonomy, and how we're organizing them is different. And for us, this is very important. And the last question that came from Les, Les, you ask Les.
Elazar.
Sorry, that's
Now you're reaching.
okay. He asked about the AMCU. The AMCU is the Amalgamated Mining and Construction Union, AMCU. This is the union that has taken over from the National Union of Mine Workers. It is the dominant union in the platinum sector. And it is the union that fought many of the strikes in the platinum. But if you go back to Marikana, the workers were members of the National Union of Mine Workers. And in June 2012, when we had a Congress, in our offices in one of the provinces, we were sitting with 10,000 joining forms of platinum workers who wanted to leave the NUM and come to NUMSA. This is before AMCU came into the picture. And 3 regions of NUMSA, we have 9 regions, said we should open our doors to these workers to come in. We must accept them. 6 of them said no, we must stick to COSATU, 1 union, 1 industry. We can't go into mining. That was June 2012. 2 months down the line, the workers went on strike, 34 winemakers were shot. And we convened a special central committee and we said that we were wrong not to have accepted those workers. Because if we had accepted those workers and have dealt with their problems, maybe, we wouldn't have had the massacre. Maybe. And it is for that reason that we decided that from now on, we will never turn our back to any workers who want to join NUMSA, wherever they come from. We are opening our scope. The idea of industrial unionism, 1 industry, 1 sector, economically, in terms of the changes in the economy, it's finished. We are organizing along value chain lines. But the strike
Along what line?
along value chain lines. And let me just to quickly just say what a value chain. At the moment, I always give this example, that if we don't have a crude, so we import crude, and it comes through the port of Durban, and then it goes into a refinery. So the people who offload that would be the dock workers, SATAU, ILW. So that's another union. In the refinery is the Chemical Workers Industrial Union. And the people who do the sort of wholesale and transporting is the Chemical or Transport Workers Union. And we as NUMSA are at the retail. Unlike you, we don't put in there, we still have 40,000 people who put in petrol into the car. So if you look at this value chain, it's different unions, different bargaining units, bargaining at different times and all of that. Yeah. We said capitalism in the end of the 20th century, 21st century, the idea of industrial unions, sectorally defined, obsolete. Right. Value chain organizing is the best way to go. So from the refinery into the car. The police, which Jack is saying, will say that guy carries the firearm. He's a metal worker. We bring him into the union. So we are organizing along these value chains.
The whole chain of...
The whole chain. Because it doesn't matter, because, we organize, for instance, smelters. The guys who take iron ore or who take coal, and they turn into that. And we say, look, what's happening in industry is that the guys who are mining the ore are organized by the National Union of Mine Workers. We smelt it. The pays are different. The bargaining rounds are different. So we are opening our scope to be able to take the guys who will mine the ore, smelt it, transport it if it's being exported out of the country. So one of the things is this value chain.
So the whole process of the production.
Oh, the whole process of the production. It's just we're trying to sound clever like academics.
And is that
we call
part of the United Front?
No, this is just the union. This is not even, this is not.
But isn't the union part of the United States?
Yeah, it is. I'll come to that. But this is collective bargaining. We just decided we're extending our scope. And we've gone to the registrar of the unions and said, instead of just being metal now, we tried to be clever and said, we're adding extractive mining. So we've added all of these so that we can now organize workers in some of these sectors. Now, the thing about AMCU, this is that when the strike started, the people who started the strike wasn't the AMCU. And if you look at this, there was a lot of self-organization. These were when NUMSA said we can't take you, the workers went to form workers' committees, independent of unions. AMCU came later to become Matunjwa, the representative, they affiliated. And the issue with this, and this applies to us, is that, I go back to the thing of the denominational break. Because these workers were organizing as committees, self-organized committees. Flat, no bureaucracy and all of that. But quite soon they joined a union, which is called AMCU, which quite frankly is not too different to the National Union of Mine Workers. And that some of the workers are beginning to find problems that they left in the NUM to find them in AMCU. And I say in my union, it's easy to leave a union and form something else, even if a new federation. If you don't cleanse yourself, if you don't think about new organizing strategies, man, 5 years down the line, you're just going to be like Kusatu. We do need new ways of doing things. And AMCU is we don't have time to go into that now, but if you look at one of the things I did some research on NUM before this exploded, the strike. You see a shaft worker, someone who drills.
Rock drillers.
If that person gets employed or gets elected as a shop steward, the agreement that they have with the Chamber of Mines, that's the NUM, is that shop steward's salary gets adjusted to that of a human resource manager. And that guy never goes underground anymore. So you had this layer in the NUM of shop stewards who never went underground, where the problems are. And basically what AMCU has done is to take the same structure of the NUM and use that. And it's a matter of time before the problems of the NUM emerge in AMCU. So let me just say about the issue of unemployment, and then we can leave it there. The issue of unemployment is a big issue. In South Africa, depending on the stats that you get, they've changed them and they've tinkered them, but 48%, if you include the discouraged people, the people who do survey for government, they say, have you been out looking for work in the last few weeks? If you say no, they say you're a discouraged worker. So it means that the unemployment rate comes to about 26%. But if you include the discouraged, those who've lost hope, half of the people of South Africa,
That's just like here.
Right.
they don't work.
That's what I thought.
They don't work. Amongst black African youth, unemployment is about 78%. That's about 78%. So we're sitting with a time bomb of people who are unemployed. Now, these are unemployed people. Let's take now the employed lot. The employed lot. The people who are covered by what you call here agreements, collective agreements, it's only 9%. I'm talking about now those that are employed. Only 9% are going. 42% have verbal agreements.
Have what?
Verbal agreements. Have verbal agreements. And about 60% of those who work in South Africa, you must do the exchange rate, less than 2,500 a month. 2,500. That's about 12. Yeah. You take from that lot that's working, the working poor, and factor the fact that many of the people are employed by a third-party agency, what in South Africa we call labor broker.
Contract labor.
It's casualized
What
labor.
percent?
I can't offend, but it's a huge. This has been the fight about the demand to the ANC that we support the ANC in 2009 was that the ANC must ban labor brokers.
What percent do they take as their cut? The brokers.
Oh, you mean the labor brokers? The labor brokers they don't follow no sectoral determination. They give what the guys
What the market bears.
what they give the guys. There are no benefits. So although we have this what is called the Rolls-Royce Constitution and Rolls-Royce labor laws, the capitalist class has found a way to circumvent the Rolls-Royce. The Ferrari is not moving. And they found a way of dealing with this. So my thing is that this is what we are sitting with in South Africa, and the idea of starting a united front is, on one hand, to just end on this, is that for too long, the warmth of being in the alliance with the ANC and the Communist Party has meant that we have not adequately linked with organizations that are fighting in the reproductive sector. And this is because of the relationship with the ally. Because you know what happens is that if you're going to link up with an organization, you start looking, what are the implications of this for the alliance with the ANC? So there are political choices that as COSATU were making. But there are also material things, and I don't want to get into the theories of a labor bureaucracy. Now, if you're like a worker with a medical aid, okay, private medical aid, the chances of you forging an alliance with a worker who sits for 8 hours waiting for a discipline at a public hospital in South Africa are very negligible. If you are a worker that is a subsidized house, the chances of you forging an alliance with a shack dweller are very slim. And what had happened over time through collective bargaining, and this is not through any deliberate ways, is that organized workers have fought for these rights through the employer. The state wasn't providing them. So you fight the employer for medical cover. You fight for housing subsidy from the employer. The state doesn't provide all this. So in a funny way, organized labor has sort of privatized public services. And therefore the ability to forge links with those that are outside of organized labor have been undermined. And this is an objective reason why there hasn't been the ability to forge links between the two sectors. And the biggest challenge that we have now that we're building the United Front, how do we take these sectors that are different and bring them into one movement? And the practical things are coordinate the work of the United Front. I'm used to shop stewards. They come to Alex's office. They all pay their taxis, cabs to get there, and they leave when they are finished. And then I sit with some of these people from the townships, and I wonder why the comrade is roaming around and not leaving. He's unemployed. He has no transport money to go home. Because, I mean, the core of these movements are unemployed. And therefore, I mean, it's not going to be an easy battle to forge in the United Front a common program between what is a fragmented working class. And therefore, it requires creativity. It requires a look at what are those things that are common. It requires, unfortunately, a minimum program that can bring these forces together. And this is what we face. And the maximalism and the stepping stone and the instrumentalism about the United Front being a party and the socialism and all of that is not going to solve these problems. We've got real problems of how to rebuild what is a demobilized and fragmented working class. A concrete analysis of your society, class structure, which forces are on this side, which are possible allies, which are the common things. There's no. I'm talking to Marxists here. You know, Lenin, when he went back to look at the development of capitalism in Russia, he was looking at the class structure of a Russian society, and there's no substitute for that. And some of the problems that we have in South Africa is that the people want to talk about some of these without even some, what I call I'm a strong believer that the Marxist method moves from the concrete to the abstract. You've got to, and now some people say empiricism. No. You've got to understand concretely the alignment of class forces. And it is through that you build.